Okay. Well, if you haven't tuned into us before, we like to do a little recap before we talk about the episode, and then we peel out that recap as a separate video on it in and of its own right. And then we jump into the conversation. So if you're watching just the recap, in the description, you can see our full episode discussion. So you can click that link. But this was episode 26, I think.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
it's called the Conclave of Elders, the Conclave of
The Conclave of the Witches of the
Okay.
Coven of Elders. Yeah.
There you go. And this episode opens up. If you remember in the previous episode, Ursulon had just arrived on his solar steed, Hanuman. And there's some chatter around, like, what is the nature of Hanuman? What is this creature? Aabria knows, like, certainly this is a spiritual creature, or a creature of the spirit world. And Ursulon realizes, thanks to Brennan's prodding, that he can actually speak to beasts, and asks Hanuman, are you here like permanently? Like, did I just get like a major upgrade? Brennan points out that he has the bridle to keep, but that Hanuman seems to be trying to get the bridle off and implying this is like a temporary point of travel. He takes the bridle off. Hanuman departs. We get a moment of a little bit of a break where Suvi can finally let her two friends know how pissed off she is about what happened, the nature of them leaving before. We get an interesting promise from Ame that she'll never do anything like that again, which is pretty interesting to see how that plays out in the future. But for the most part, Suvi still is pretty pissed off, but they're at least able to sort of like resolve the tension by Ame apologizing. Ursulon mentions very briefly where he's been, like his experience with his family. And they decide to check out the sort of, I can't remember if it was like a tower or like a little, like maybe like a keep that was set aside for Grandmother Rin. But they decide to go take a look at that and look at it more in detail. And Brennan describes a very, I can't think of the word, conservative little humble cottage in this keep where pretty much everything has been huddled in front of the fireplace. And there's a comment that, is it humble because Grandmother Rin preferred it? Was Indri trying to be respectful of Grandmother Rin's style and kind of create a humble space? But it's very different from like the grand development that we've seen like this entire castle be. While they're chatting in Grandmother Rin's cottage, or rather the place dedicated to Grandmother Rin, there's a knock on the door, and the best way to describe the person who comes to the door is, imagine like a chimney sweeper from like the early 1900s. There is this little girl in like dilapidated clothes. Brennan describes her as like, her clothing's torn. She has soot on her. This is Neef, and she informs them that she is the apprentice of Indri. And her job, amongst many things, is to clean all of the towers across the castle grounds. The party's immediately concerned. Neef is a very total opposite in terms of Indri's like esteem and beauty. And there's a couple of things they try to do. First, they try to offer help to Neef, which Neef declines and says, you can tell that she's like repeated or like rather memorized things that Indri has said to her, such as like, no, I cannot accept help because that would imply that I need help and I have everything that I need, yada, yada, you get it. But Ame's a little bit clever about it. She says, hey, I have these honey cakes for you to take. I would like you to taste them and ensure that they are of the best quality for the other witches, which Neef is very grateful for. And then Suvi she says, give me your scarf. Like, I want to have your scarf, which Neef obliges. And then Suvi uses mend to fix the scarf. And then says, never mind, I don't want it anymore, and hands it back to Neef and says, this isn't a scarf that I actually want to have anymore. But anyway, all that to say, Neef explains that the witches are coming shortly, and if there's anything else that they have need of, to just let her know. Neef leaves. Ursulon's like, who is this Indri? Like, what's going on here? And they begin to describe Indri. I think Ami actually says, like, imagine the most beautiful person you can. And then, like, that cranked up to 11. Like, they're already, like, gorgeous. And then they use magic to be even more incredible. Suvi also is feeling fairly still miffed about what brought them here. And she says, hey, I'm glad we're all back together. I'm glad everyone's safe, but I need to go check on my people, the wizards that I came with. And she departs. Ursulon and Ame, Ursulon shares some more information about seeing Kalaya and their family, and then says, hey, Kalaya said if you were to see my shield, you might have some ideas for what you might do to improve it. He brings out the shield with the tree painted on it. And Brennan basically tells Erika that she's going to have a choice to either make this item sturdier or easier to wield. We don't quite get the answer of where she goes with that, though, because we actually cut over to Suvi, who's roaming the halls of the castle to try to find Indri. Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So Suvi is basically kind of, you got to remember that she has this secret mission that she doesn't even really remember, but like she's compelled to do it, right? So as she's kind of quote unquote making her way back to her quarters, she kind of like wants to run into Indri, sort of. And so she's kind of more so roaming around, just like scoping things out. And as she's doing that, she comes across this door and she peeks in and or actually excuse me, before that happens she does actually run into Neef once more, who is carrying like 5 scarves, and Suvi is like, hey, I don't actually need a scarf, like I was just trying to help and get around these weird rules.
Yeah.
And Neef is like, could you please just like take one so that I can complete the request you gave me? And so Suvi does pick one, and she picks one that like most matches Indri. um and then she asks like, hey Neef, like what's the best way to get back to my quarters? And Neef explains kind of like, if you don't want to get into the cold, like go this way, you'll go past the library or whatever. And so Suvi's like, thank you so much. So then as Suvi is going, she comes past this library and she takes a peek inside. And inside is the most beautiful thing she has ever seen, she says. It is this opulent, like gorgeous library that has this enormous telescope in it that is pointing up at the heavens, at the stars. And Benner describes these like ice shelves lining this room that like go on forever basically. And what is on these shelves are essentially stars themselves, as if they have been plucked from the sky and kept here. And basically just these radiant gems that are projecting shadows everywhere, like the brightest diamonds you've ever seen. And each of the stars has like a plaque in front of it, that's in an ancient language, basically describing the name of it or the name of its constellation. And Suvi's just taking all of this in. And again, she literally claims it's the most beautiful place she's ever been, most beautiful thing she's ever seen. And in addition to the stars lining the walls, there are like these wells in the room that are just filled with a limitless amount of even more stars. So as she's walking around, she kind of has this compulsion, because like this room and this place has gifted her such beauty that she wants to return the favor. And that takes the shape of leaving the music box here, which again, that was her secret mission, but this is how she's reconciled it in her mind. So she finds this kind of like little hidden alcove, opens the music box, and places it there, as a gift to this place. And after she does that, she decides to just take her leave. So we then cut back to Ame and Ursulon, who Ame is still looking at this shield and still trying to decide how best she wants to enchant it. And ultimately, the decision is made to make it quicker and lighter. And Ursulon is like, yeah, that sounds great to me. And so then Brennan tells us that this is a +3 magical shield that now has a bonus action where you can extend that +3 bonus to an ally within 5 feet of you. So Ursulon kind of like tries this out by like protecting Ame really quick. And there's this great moment where he like now says, I am the protector of the wizard sky and the guardian of the witch of the wild's heart. Again, really sweet moment. And then after that, we basically cut to the next morning. And there's this interesting line here, which we'll probably talk more about in our discussion, but about like time not moving here. So it's not like actually like the sun didn't rise insofar as it's morning, but it's the next morning. And there's like a reflection of eternity here, is what Brennan described it as. But anyways, everyone wakes up, each of them receiving a respective knock at their door. Costa, Indri's familiar, is at Suvi's door, and Neef is at Ame and Ursulon's, and they tell them that within the hour, the arrival of the Coven of Elders will take place. And Suvi basically asks, like, as an outsider, like, is there anywhere like I shouldn't go, that I'm like not allowed while this is happening? And Costa tells her that there is like a chamber where the actual meeting will take place, and no one is allowed in there except members of the Coven. But other than that, like, you're chill, basically. And Suvi just knows that, like, while that meeting will be private, there will be like an adjourning of that meeting where Ame will be able to come and conference with her retinue and the other witches as well, obviously. Um, so everyone comes from their place and meets in this great hall. Um, and we can kind of get a glimpse into this other chamber off the great hall, which is this like crazy tall, cylindrical chamber that has a massive dome at the top that seems to be directly beneath the North Star. And at like the top of this tall room is a platform with 5 thrones on it. So that is where like the actual coven will take place. So we see that, but then everybody is still just hanging out in the great hall itself around a big fireplace, kind of just all coming together. So Ame, Suvi, and Ursulon, of course, reunite. But then Indri walks in, and this is the first time Ursulon is seeing her, and he fails his charm against her. So, he's instantly in love, basically. And as that's happening, the great doors burst open, and in pours a horde of animals. Brennan describes wolves, panthers, falcons, eagles, hawks, leopards, lions. The entire like jungle basically comes in, and all of these animals are like feral looking. Their jaws are soaked with blood, as if they have just freshly killed. And at the center of this stampede, essentially, is this group of people. And at the center of that group of people is an ancient looking woman, covered in this like gown of moss and bark. And Brenner describes her as an older black woman with verdant green eyes. And as she steps, moss kind of like grows in front of her. This is Hakaya, the Hakaya of the Woodland Green. And her familiar is this like ancient serpent that's draped around her shoulders. And to either side, she's having people help her walk because she's ancient again. So on the left, Brenda describes this wild one, this spirit that's like made of oak, like he's completely made of wood. And then on her other side is this witch that is like feral, like blood dripping from like every piece of her. She's wearing deer antlers, like a deer skin is like her only clothing. Her hands are like claws. You can't really tell if like it's a hand or it's a claw. Just extremely kind of feral and rough looking. And basically everyone has to make a saving throw upon glancing at this woman. And I think Ame succeeds, but the other two fail. But then there's another saving throw that has to be made, and it's the opposite. Ame fails and the other two succeed. So the one Ame fails, Brennan describes she starts to get sleepy, and this is apparently the effect from Hakaya of the Woodland Green. But Ursulon and Suvi fail from this feral looking witch, and they basically, Brennan describes that you get this feeling like if you were to run right now, then this witch would come kill you, and like there would be no magical rule that prevented that. So they're like, okay. And basically we realize that this is the Witch of the Wild Hunt grimoire, and all of these beasts, of course, are her kind of retinue. So also on Grimoire's shoulder is a tiny little girl who like also looks feral, and I think is eating a heart, and like blood's pouring down her mouth, and she's like holding on to Grimoire's antlers. And then a hawk, which is Grimoire's familiar, perches on her other shoulder. So everybody's coming in. One of these wolves I described earlier transforms into a man, and like looks at Ursulon, basically wanting to fight him. And a group of fireflies come from around Hakaya, and they transform into a woman. And basically everyone kind of settles and arrives. And this is again the Wild Hunt, the Witch of the Wild Hunt, and the Witch of the Woodland Green arriving at the Conclave of Elders. So Hakaya approaches, looks at Ame. Ame introduces herself, and Hakaya only replies with honor, honor. So then Grimoire turns to Ame and is like, "Are you going to say hello to me?" And Ame says, "Oh, I long hoped to meet you, and it's an honor to meet you as well, and your apprentice." And then Grimoire asks if she can see Ame's teeth. So Ame opens her mouth, and Grimoire like puts her entire face inside of it, basically smells, and then it says, "You want to look at my teeth?" And she like opens her mouth, and Ame's like, "No, like I know how strong you are. Like I wouldn't, I don't need to do that. I would never presume." And Grimoire's like, "I was just a joke. I was gonna lick your nose." Um, as all that's happening, we then hear a crow cry out, and then attention is drawn towards that other chamber with the 5 thrones at the very top. And already seated in her throne is Marara, the Witch of the Waning Moon. Basically, jet black robes, the white mask, like the crown of thorns, and the long, like creepy nails, just like clicking on the arm of the throne, basically saying, "I think it's time for this to begin." And that's where the episode ends. Again, episode 26 of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, the Conclave of the Witches of the Coven of Elders. So yeah, if you made it this far and you want to see our full discussion and you're on the recap video, be sure to check the link down below.